Okay, so random videos on YouTube of people doing stupid shit. Just they get more views than essays, and people told me I should just make a video talking about the essay, which seems stupid because then it's going to get all the people who don't read. But I'll try it. There are a few key points that need to be made that are not in your dialogue. No one in your content feed is expressing these concepts, and that's a problem. First, you don't think of new options very often. Winston Churchill famously said, "Democracy is the worst system of government ever tried, except for all the other ones." And that's telling because if it's so bad, why don't you think of some new ones? So I did. I've written essays about it. No one reads the essays. So I'm going to explain it to you. If you rely on a dictator or a monarch, then everyone is as stupid as that guy. And that's stupid. You got an oligarchy, it's just a group of stupid guys in charge of everybody. You're not going to make things work properly. You're not going to actually solve the real problem. Especially considering that they can only hear a little bit, and the people who are telling them that little bit are usually lying to look good. The classic example is when Catherine the Great wanted to make sure that her country was well run. She went touring around the country, and her advisors set up fake villages to impress her. So she never realized what life was actually like in Russia. And that's called a Potemkin village. So we see a lot of that where you're in a filter bubble and your leader is in a filter bubble and none of you are making good decisions at all. And you only think of a few options, maybe one option every century or so, and you all complain about it, but you never come up with new options. You just say, that one's my favorite, so it must work, or that one's my favorite, so it must work. And no one's actually checking to see what works in reality. Here's how to do that. Because there is a group of people on Earth who consistently do that. And they're the only group of people who has seen consistent improvement for hundreds of years. All your other human endeavors have been doing this, where you don't really improve. The only group that's actually seen steady improvement is the people who use the scientific method. They actually check reality, like an engineer. They have valid arguments and proofs, like a mathematician. I'm a mathematician. I do engineering design. I've solved real problems. I figured my own life out well enough that I'm not overwhelmed like you are. I don't have trouble forming healthy relationships like you do. And I can spend the rest of my time solving the problems that you never did. That's the proof in reality that someone's doing it right, if they get those results. So if you're not able to figure out how to solve your own problems, you shouldn't be pretending that you can solve the world's problems. It's just obvious. Here's an alternative you never thought of. I did. If you take everyone's concerns and interests, you personally would have a list, one list, where you list your concerns and interests, most important to least important. A concern is something you don't want to happen, or you want it to stop. An interest is something that you do want it to happen, or you want it to keep happening. And you have to have it on one list, because if you have some concern, we don't know where it stands in relation to your interests unless they're all on the same list. So you got a list. You could just have a free app where you list your concerns and interests. And you can change them at any time. You have a scary dream, put that concern at the top. You watch a cool video, put that interest higher. You get to change them whenever you want. You don't have to wait 4 years for an election. You don't have to wait for your favorite political party to decide to include that on their platform. You get to pick your own concerns and interests. And then those concerns and interests get bucketed. So everyone who's got the same concern as you or the same interest as you all y'all in there. Now you could let an AI do the bucketing for you as long as you get to fix it. You get to check and say, no, that was wrong. Because that's going to teach the AI how to bucket things properly. So you got one concern that's like really popular. A lot of people got it, parking. Another one's making more money at your job. Another one's housing. Another one's bias. Another one's safety. Another one's your relationships. If you're lonely or you're struggling or you're being abused or been abused. There are lots of concerns and interests. You just find out how much each person across the whole country actually has that concern and interest. You aggregate. That's the word for that kind of thing. So now you got this aggregated list with all these buckets, and they got the most common at the highest rank down to the least common at the lowest rank. And here's what you have to do. Your government has to address the big ones first. They have to be required to meet your concerns and interests first. And if they don't, you don't wait 4 years. You fire them. If we do that, then you never have a great financial crisis. Because the great financial crisis was caused when the government decided to pass a law that helped these people over here. The billionaire hedge fund class. They wanted a law that no one else wanted. And that caused the great financial crisis. So you have to insist that your government address the combined concerns and interests of everyone. Now, parking is a common concern, but it's not a big issue. So you have to take how many people at what rank, and then you have to also multiply it by how painful it is. And then you divide by how expensive it would be to fix it. So if it would be cheap to fix, and it's a big pain point, and a lot of people ranked it highly, that's what your government has to deal with. Nothing else is going to work. So when you do that, if you're looking at housing, for example, the way to find what will address the housing problem it's what DARPA already uses for their funding model. We know this. We know the correct answer. Scientists, engineers, and mathematicians, we do the work to find the real solutions. And I'm letting you know that you never even learn about the real solutions, and you pretend you got better ones. Anyone who wants to say that they can fix the housing crisis, sign up for the DARPA funding round. You get a little bit of money so that you have an opportunity to think of an idea. And then after a certain amount of time, maybe just a few months, we check on everyone. And we're going to trim down some of them. The people who are actually coming up with new ideas, they're into the next round of funding. And they get a bigger piece of funding when they do. And we check on them in another 3 to 6 months. And that's when we trim them down some more. Just a 10 to 30% trim each time. And every time they make it to a higher rank of funding, we're giving them a bigger bucket of funding. And we're giving them connections in the network, and we give them the tools they need to do it. And what you're going to find at the top is a bunch of people who spend a bunch of time figuring out lots of new options. But we don't know which one is going to work. Scientists, engineers, and mathematicians don't pretend to be able to predict what works. We check reality. So now you got all these options, and you're going to try each one in a number of different places. All the options get tried in a number of different places simultaneously. And you're going to be looking to see the before and the after. So you got to measure before, and you got to measure after. And you might complain that that's a lot of work. It's less work than screwing up for generations. Screwing up for generations costs you a lot more. So we look at all of them, and we're not going to be measuring just the physical outcome, because that's not always what matters. to people. There are physical requirements. You have to stay alive. If you go extinct, that's a physical requirement regardless of your opinion. But we also have to make sure that we're doing what are called longitudinal surveys and detailed interviews to understand what people really value. So there might be one housing option that technically, according to an engineer, works really well, but no one likes to live there. It sucks. There's lots of architects who make beautiful looking buildings that everyone hates to live in. They've made entire cities like that, like Brasilia. So we have to listen to what people actually value before and after. We have to measure where they're at emotionally and socially, in addition to the physical results. And so we might have a bunch of different housing options, and we're going to look at each of those housing options, not just how they do in housing. If you have a housing solution and it's great for housing, but it makes everyone less safe and lowers their income at their job and makes it hard to find parking and increases bias, okay, that's a bad housing option. You use the distribution of the aggregated concerns and interests as your metric. If something was a big issue, then whether or not that one got affected is also a big issue. If something's a small issue and it got affected by your housing solution, it's a small issue. So you multiply by the aggregate curve of concerns and interests for all the impacts that your housing option had. And that'll show you all the different housing options measured according to all the different concerns and interests at once. And whichever housing option is the best all-arounder, the housing option that meets most needs well, that is the actual best option. We don't vote on it because almost everyone is uninformed and pretends that they know reality when they never learned what it is. They pretend they know what will work best without ever trying it. They have all kinds of excuses and delusions, and they make horrible decisions in their own life. So you shouldn't ever trust anyone's whim or opinion. You shouldn't trust your whim or opinion, because you know how often you screw up. You shouldn't trust politicians' whim or opinion. You see how often they screw up. You shouldn't even trust academics' whim or opinion. That's called technocracy, where you just put people from universities in charge of everything, and then they just say, I like this. We should do this because I must be smart. No, you have to actually check reality. And anyone who's saying different is saying a whim and an opinion that doesn't work. So we check reality to find the option that actually does meet your stated concerns and interests best. It's not my stated concerns and interests. This isn't you making me a sandwich and giving me a massage. This isn't a king. This isn't a dictator. This is meeting the entire population's concerns and interests best possible. And that's going to change. As people's values change, as new technologies make things an opportunity, as the world around us changes and we have new situations, we continually reevaluate, because it would be really stupid to not reevaluate. That is the only way to run a government that functions. By definition. If you're ignoring 49% of the population, then you're ignoring half the problem. And if you take turns ignoring one side or the other, that's not justice, and it still doesn't solve the problem. If you pick some person who you think is smart and then just do whatever they say, well, you only pick the people who you think are smart when you're dumb. And so you always pick dumb people. You always pick the people who make sense to you when so little makes sense to you. That's the correct way to run a government. I've solved problems that you never understood. And I'm telling you the answer. If you disagree, then you can be sure that you don't think clearly.